to my client, if you do get this recording later, I am live streaming. So if I am talking to chat a bit, don't mind them. They are all very friendly, and I do talk to my chat a lot more. So I'm not saying that they need to be quiet for this tutorial or anything. They can ask questions as well, which hopefully will help you if you end up having those same questions. So what I've done so far here is I've pulled up your reference, your study, and then I'll go over this again real quick. I duplicated the reference, and I think what's really helpful is if you have your study the same size as the reference, right? Because I understand that you were saying that you were previously painting everything in with the greens because you were a little bit fearful of the fall colors, which is understandable because they can be a lot. There's definitely a lot to work with, but I think we can still tackle it. So you're giving yourself a little bit extra work if you are trying to get the perspective, get the space, get the composition, and change the colors and change the size of the canvas at the same time. It's a little bit of, it's a lot. So I think what we're going to do, I'm just going to show you how I would go about a study. Then I'm going to go to your study and point out what I would adjust or pay attention to. And then I will go and break down a little bit about how you can paint trees in general if you want to just practice the rendering side of it, right? Because I'm going to show you in this study, I'm actually not going to put in a lot of detail, and you'll see why. So what I'm going to do first is I have your second piece here, and I've just basically alpha selected this so that I can't paint outside the line, right? I won't be able to go outside here. There we go. And then I'm just going to fill it in. And I have everything zoomed out right now because I find that it's easier to work when you are zoomed out at first and then you can go into the detail later. And it's something that I struggle with too because I always want to go straight to detail. But trust me, when you're doing a landscape piece, this is the way that you want to do it. So I am going to go and use a, what do I think? Probably something like a charcoal, I feel like. I want something very, very textured to work with this. So it's like any watercolor or any charcoal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock this so that I'm only painting inside the line. And the color that I picked is the color of the grass here. So what I'm first going to do is I'm breaking down the color of this background here. I'm comparing, okay? I'm comparing the shape of the different elements you have. So you have your foreground here, and then you have your background. So right now, I'm just going to block in the shape of the foreground, okay? That's all I'm gonna do. My guess is when you did this, you sort of went layer by layer, section by section, which is fine, but I feel like that this is sort of what you may have done because this is how I used to work, right? Is you end up putting detail in every section and then moving on to the next section and then adding the detail and moving on to the next section, and you're going layer by layer, and what happens is you end up creating this sort of diorama effect, right? Where everything kind of looks like layers of paper that you have that you've sort of stacked one in front of the other, and it kind of creates like one of those 3D paper craft effects. But you don't actually want that for this. You want it to we want it to flow very nicely. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show you how I would I think I'm just going to use like maybe 3 layers, and I'm guessing that you probably used more. I could do this in 1 layer, but I'm going to do it in 3. Because I see 3 elements to this, right? I see our main foreground, and then I see our middle ground, which is mainly the trees, and then the background, which is the mountains, and then I guess if you wanted, you could have the 4th layer, which would be the sky, right? So I'm going to treat this as, we're going to go, let's see, probably best to go backwards, and then we can sort of refine as we go. So let's grab the sky. Lock it so it can't move would be helpful. I can see that this is very, very bright, right? And it doesn't really matter if I'm going out of the way because we're gonna have these stacked layers, right? But I'm gonna show you how to integrate them. We're not gonna be doing a master study. We're gonna be doing a study. So we're doing a photo study. It's a bit more loose. It doesn't have to be exact. but I'm moving the cloud over just so it matches a little bit more with my composition. And I could sort of tweak it, move it away how I need to, keep painting over it. But let's just say that that's our background for the sky element, right? I'll make another layer over that one. And then I'm just going to sort of tackle the mountain area. Test it against. If that's too warm, then I can go back. And I can say, okay, it's gonna have a little bit more coolness. I'm gonna bring this more, I still have it very, very muted, but it is more in the blue area. And that's a little closer. And then there are some patches where it's like very, very vibrant. So we'll add that as well. So I'm just going to get the rest of the mountain range here. And I'm just making it large enough so that I can work with the next layer, right? And I can't really see what's going on behind here, so I'm just adding in the area that I see. So now this is just a solid piece that's not helping us too much yet, right? I'm gonna lock this piece so then I can't color outside of it. And I'm going to start adding the deeper tones. I can see that there's deeper tone that sort of separates the edge here. So I'm going to quickly sketch in where that edge is. And then make this a little darker. And I'm just sort of roughly estimating it, right? Purple as well. We're going to start adding in the break of these mountain ranges. And again, I'm just tapping, lightly tapping, again. Something you'd see on Bob Ross, I suppose. But I'm just lightly tapping with my brush. And in that light tapping, we are making sure that our strokes are not super, super strict, right? Because if I wasn't doing the light tapping, right? If I was just, you know, getting the idea down, then that's fine, you can. It's more of an oil painting technique, and we want to sort of blend the colors together. I'm gonna grab that light color again. I can see a little bit of it where the range is changing. And then there's a little bit that's getting picked up on the side. Probably where the side of the mountain is before it hits the valley. And then, I believe, from what I can tell, our sun is coming from this direction, right? So the sun rays are kind of hitting here. And this looks to be about sunset. So I'm guessing the sun is actually probably very low. And what that's doing is it's making these brighter pieces on the edge of the mountain. So I can pick it up a little bit over here. On this side. And a little bit here in the range. I'm gonna make sure that's a little bit more purple, less blue. We want a little bit of variation and a little bit lighter. Because in a sense, right, the light of the sky is reflecting on the mountain. So we're sort of pulling in some of the sky color into the mountain very, very gradually. You can even grab some of the sky color itself and then just lightly paint it on the mountain so it blends into the color. I'm just grabbing the darkest parts of the painting, and I am making my brush a little bit smaller, like you were doing with the tree caps, and I'm just adding a tiny bit, almost semi-randomly, wherever I just think it needs to be a tiny bit of darker tone to create a little bit more contrast. It's not so much random. I am being careful about where I'm putting it, but just like just in the cracks and crevices, more or less. Just sort of make things feel a little bit more finished and full. Especially anywhere where the mountains are sort of changing and adjusting their shape, right? I think we've spent enough time on the mountain range at this point. So, let's see. How are we doing on the color? That's about right. If I needed to tweak it later, I could. One thing I am noticing is I did paint it much larger than it is in this piece. So overall, what I will probably do is I'm going to just take the whole thing and I'm just going to shrink it a little bit. And I know this is something you could not really do traditionally, but since you are using Procreate, that is something you would be able to do anyway. And this next layer is going to be a little bit trickier, right? So here's what I propose. Okay? Here's what I propose, because now we're starting to get into the layer with, oh no, the layer with the trees. So let me just show you. So our main area here, we have this big sweeping motion. Actually, hang on, let me make this easier to see. There we go. We have a big sweeping motion of these hills that sort of break our composition in half, right? So that's already something very calm, very rounded. Then we have the fence here, and it's making an S shape, which again, S shapes are always going to be more gentle. They sort of guide us. They have this natural flow like water that is very appealing to people. And then we again repeat that curvature, that valley. It has, like, it's not horizontal, so it's not stable and secure, but it has a very calming presence, right? So we've got the S curve of the fence, and then we've got these peaks and valleys. We have some visual differences here. We have a little bit more of that S curve, kind of bringing the rest of the road together. We've got these bits of the trees, and they kind of flow in this way, a bit of another S curve, and then sort of continues up here. And then we have the mountains here, which are creating a little bit of a visual difference. So everything here was very, very soft, very rounded. And then we have the one element that's a little bit sharp, and then the man-made element that is also very sharp, right? So we have our sharp natural elements, we've got our flow of the trees and the road, and then we have our sharper man-made element. And the other thing that's very important to note is that in this photo in particular, the way that this is portrayed, we have this road, and it's going this direction. What's it doing? It is leading our eye to the man-made piece. That is very important. This is a form of compositional trick, right? So if I was to break this into, you know, photo thirds, right? We have this man-made piece more or less right here. It's a little bit off, but it doesn't have to be perfect, right? And this is the rule of thirds in photography. So you want your main subject to be in one of these 4 places. It doesn't really matter which, but it's a general rule that you would want your main subject to sort of be in one of these middle corner areas. It's not directly in the middle, it's not directly on the side, it's not like hanging on the top or hanging on the bottom. It's kind of in this nice, comfortable middle area. So in this case, the man-made object is filling that middle area. And then over here, that mountain is, again, not straight in the middle. It's not straight on the side. It is kind of in that middle corner. It's just a very appealing way of composition. And then again here, with this field, if it had stopped here, it would be a little bit awkward. But it's not. It's continuing the whole area. And its middle area is right here, again, not straight in the center, not on the side. It's in this middle third. And this is very, very appealing to the eye. So you've got our man-made piece here, our strong mountain piece here, and our main patch that doesn't have a lot going on, so the eye can rest. And it's right in the middle here. So with all that in mind, that is one of the reasons why the composition of the piece works very well. And just to point out what you have right now, so if I was to do that again, right? You have your thirds, and again, this is why it helps to have them all in the same compositional format. You do have the man-made object smack dab here. That is a good thing. That's a good thing. You did a good job by keeping this here. You do have the road in the same general composition, right? Right in the center. What I am seeing with the road, though, is that because you omitted the fence, you don't have that part leading the eye to the man-made structure. So that is definitely a very appealing part to this photo, is the man-made structure being led with the road. Instead, we sort of have a piece of the field here, a piece here that is very high, and then you have another piece going down here. And you do have this piece, which is good, because now you're creating that contrast with the peaks and the valleys. But what I'm mainly noticing here is these shapes are kind of repeating each other, right? You have this overall corner flow, and it's a very sharp corner, right? It's not like a calm valley. It has almost a squarish shape to it, so you just want to be careful of that. You just want to watch that. It's hard to see in here because there's a lot happening, but this might be more of a man-made hill. It's a little hard to tell. I think this one is sort of going downward and sloping. But anyway, I think you have a little bit of repetition of shape here. And then, let me see. Your mountain range, I would have a little bit off to the side, just so you have some variation between where the man-made object is and then where the mountain is. A little bit closer to this corner, so that you have that nicer composition. And then, let's go and add our next layer. So again, I'm just going to pay attention here to the shapes, the negative space. And like I said, I want to start off by creating these hills, and then we're going to go in between with the layers, okay? We'll go back with my main color and sort of erase where that was. I just want it very faint. I just want to get the idea of where it is. And then I can go back and I can find the right color. So there's more of a blue-green, right? So I'm just going to grab some of these more blue-greens. And again, I'm just using my, textured brush, and it kind of helps us get, like, patches of grass feeling, right? I don't have to do too much to that. And really, any textured brush in Procreate will work for this. You just want something that's not a full, solid, round brush, right? We just want some way to make really quick texture. And then you won't have to do this dappled effect that might be taking too long, right? You just need a little bit of a textured brush. That's all you need. And I can see that, the grass is a little bit dead over here. It's, it's fall, so the grass is drying out. I'm gonna put a little bit more yellow here. There's a big patch that I see right here of yellow. It's a pretty intense yellow. And then just bring that all back. And I'm just gonna grab more of that red. I'm gonna make a really, really big brush, just so I can cover a really big surface really softly. And that'll get us our dried grass effect. And then this is all gonna be trees, so we don't have to spend too much time refining this area. I'm just getting a little bit of the edge here, and I'll replace that with the granite in just a bit. Let's see here. Let's go with what we have so far. We've got our sky, and we've got our mountains, and then we've got our foreground. So in between the mountains and the foreground, I'm going to make another layer. So here is where things get a little bit scary. I know that you were worried about the color. We're going to go through the color. What I'm going to do for this, we're going to estimate a lot, okay? And then I will sort of teach you how to do things in more detail. But when you're doing a photo study of a big field of trees, you actually don't have to do too much. You just have to get your color values right, okay? Here's how I'm going to do the next one. I think it'll be best to start from dark to light. So I'm going to grab this dark green of this fir tree, right? I'm going to make my brush fairly small. I'm going to pay attention to the shape going on here, okay? and then a little bit of the shape here and here. I'm not going to bother with this part right now. That's going to be our main foreground. I'm just going to bother with this middle ground of trees right here. Go to our middle layer. That's in between our mountain and in between our foreground. And I'm just going to pay attention to these shapes. I can make this purely solid because this is nothing but tree. I can see that these fir trees pop up a little bit more. In this end, I'm going to add a little bit more texture here. And over here, you can see where these are popping up. So I'm just getting the general shape of this tree here. More or less estimating this silhouette, right? And then I see some that are not, they're not fir trees. But we're just sort of gonna estimate their shape again. So again, I'm just looking at the silhouette, and I'm using the texture of my brush here to just sort of estimate, and this is pretty solid. I'll just sort of add it in, and if this is a little bit lighter than our silhouette, then I'll be adding it a little on this side where the sun is going to pick it up. And I do see that you did it here, but you want to keep in mind what direction your sunlight is. So if your sun is coming from here, for instance, from this direction and going down, then you want most of your light, you have it on the hills here. But then on the tree, I can tell that you were paying attention to the fact that there's sort of a uniform color here. But you can kind of fake it a little bit. You see over here, there's like, you can see that there is more of a highlight and a little bit more of a shadow. And you can kind of mix those as you go. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of an overpaint of your piece, just like where I would estimate shadows to go. And I'm doing this study. I'm doing the study, a little bit of a paint over on yours, and then a little bit of a call out. And hopefully that'll help explain things. So again, I'm just using the texture of the brush to add a little bit more color. A little bit more color where I would think that there's light. And again, I have this locked so that I can't paint outside of it, okay? That'll help you a lot. You can see that this is like very, very difficult, right? With the interspersed color, but I know we can do this. What you can probably do is go back and forth. So there is a lot of interspersion. There is a lot of color mixing. It does get a little bit confusing. But this is something that we can get done. I am going to pay attention to where these are, more or less. And I'm going to do what I was doing before with the slight touches of a little bit of a lighter green. We're going to go in and start adding more of that yellow. That yellow is going to be a little bit more powerful. It's going to be taking up more of the piece. Is more orange. We're going to start with our yellow. We're going to go from green to yellow to orange to red. I'm going to make this a little bit of a duller yellow, so it's not super out of our league here. And I can see a bit of the yellow here, a little bit interspersed. This is why I'm layering the color, is because it is mixed in a lot. So I'm just going to go anywhere here, make my brush a little bit bigger, anywhere where I see that there is like a brighter yellow. Make it a little bit warmer, just so it matches the tone of these other trees. I'm just putting a little bit of color anywhere there should be yellow. And that's the thing when you're painting trees, when you're painting things that are very organic, you don't have to be very precise. You can just get the impressionistic feeling of it. I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow, making a bigger brush, just getting the feeling down. And then anywhere where there should be orange, I think I'll paint in a little bit of yellow just to use it as a base tone. Okay? So anywhere here where it's going to be mainly orange, I'll use a little bit of a base tone here. And I have to be careful because it is a little bit darker. So I'll make it more like maybe a gold. Maybe a gold will be good. Get a little bit more towards that bright yellow gold. But I don't want to do it too fast. Just adding the color at the moment. And then over here, I just want to follow the main shape of the trees, right? So I might make my brush a little bit smaller. And just sort of do that wire brush shape again, right? a little bit of that wire brush shape all throughout here. And then I might have a little bit of a gap if any of these trees are meant to be a darker color. It's that ugly in between. It's that little middle that can be really discouraging. But you have to push through, because once you get past the ugly phase, it'll look a lot nicer, right? Okay. So now that we have a sort of a muted gold established, now I'm going to start going in with the more intense colors, right? I'm going to take this brighter gold, and I'm going to do the same thing. Especially on the right side, because that is where my light is coming from. And you see that I'm not coloring it over fully? I'm leaving a bit of that gold, and that gold is becoming our shadow. Might have a little bit of it here on the edge, but I've got a lot of that shadow that I want to keep establishing. And you can see we're sort of getting this idea of this larger forest area developing. And over here, this is going to be a little bit trickier because we can see it in more detail. So, you know, people can judge us a little bit easier. But I'm just getting the color down where I see it. And you'll see once we add the branches, it'll all come together. I'm adding these very, very intense golds now. And then it's going to get more intense. It keeps going. Now we're going to go even deeper. Now we're going to start going towards that crazy orange. And I can see it up the top here. It's actually very hard for me to discern what is happening here. So I'm actually just going by color instead of shape at this point. And by just being very light with my brush and making these little strokes, I'm able to get the feeling of foliage. Without exactly getting the foliage, right? And then we're going to add darker color in between, and that's going to help solidify things again. I don't want to add too much of that, actually. I want to go back to that yellow. And I want to start adding some really bright marigolds. Really bright marigold color here. And I'm sort of going in a little bit of a circle shape, because I want these to start feeling like branches. And again, I'm being pretty loose with it. But I'm just making little strokes with my brush. And I'm just doing the branches like you have here. I'm just doing a little bit of the branch work where I would see the light hitting things. And then we're going to go back here. We're going to add a little bit more of those light tones to the tops of the trees where the sun is, where you're going to get the most sun, right? And you can see when I'm doing it, I'm doing a little bit of a pointed effect. And that pointed effect is kind of giving us our treetops. And I'm not doing them for all of them. I'm just picking a few. I'm just picking a few that could use those really intense yellows that we see here. And they don't quite look exactly like trees, but from far away you get the feeling that they're trees. Because it does still feel like what we're after, right? It does still feel like that countryside with the field of forest. And notice how when I was making these strokes, I was able to stop myself from fully coloring these. I had these gaps. These gaps are the other trees of the other colors that you were thrown off by before. So the more dark, natural colored trees are sort of interspersed with these really bright gold autumn trees. You see how I'm not bothering with the man-made structure yet? I don't really have a need to. I'm putting all my focus in the trees. And then I'm going to start going back and adding the tips that may have disappeared last time when we were adding all of our golds and reds. And then I can kind of add in where a branch or two might go, right? So I have my trunk. Add a little bit here. And I'm sort of fading it. I'm not really connecting them. And the reason I'm not connecting them is because then it looks like the thickness of the leaves is in between them. I'll just do that with some of the foreground ones. Right? I don't even need to really make the branches. I can kind of just give the general illusion of where the trunk is. And then if it seems too staticky, then I just go back in with a brush and sort of cover it up a little bit. And it has a little bit of that feeling of tree foliage. If you feel like you went too far, this is something you can always do, is go back and forth with the dark and the light, sort of giving a little bit more visual information, right? I'm just sort of going over everything very rough, very loosely. It's very, I mean, you can see here, it's hard to separate these trees a little bit when they're overlapping like this. But as long as you have, like, some semblance of the trunk, then you can just get the idea of it. And then if we want to, what we can do is we can just do a very quick brightness and contrast adjustment. Just on this piece, just because I think it'll help us a lot. There we go. Alright. So all I did is a 10% contrast. Just a little bit of a punch. That's all we need. This part is not going to be too difficult. So now that we have all these pieces, right? We've got our foreground, we've got our midground, our mountains, and then our full background. We're going to do one more piece on top. And we're just going to fill everything else in. And now that we know how to do the trees from here, now we can do these a lot easier. Now we understand the process, right? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the road in. Once we get the road in, we can get the trees in. I'm just going to get the general feeling of the shape of the road here. You can see that it's like, we're following this path even though we don't really have much information to work with, right? This is where our observation of shape language comes in. And I can see that it ends right there at the corner. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to end it right there at the corner. I'm stopping a little bit early because it has a guardrail. And then this is all going to be taken up by tree. I think we mainly just have the guardrail here. So I'm going to use a darker color and sort of quickly establish it. Because this is man-made, you generally want to be more careful about the detail. But because this is just a photo study, I'm not super concerned with it, right? I got that shape a little off, so I'm just going to use a liquify tool to sort of shift it around. I made it a little too much of an S-curve. And then we're just going to take that base color again, and what we're going to do here is we're going to add it right to the top. And by doing that, we're establishing the light source of the guardrail. And a little bit more of that dead grass over here. A little bit more of that, those darker tones. Start adding some very rough tufts. Doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, I'll probably make another layer up top here, but let's just do our middle ground of trees and our church area. So I'm just going to grab this base color here. And this is going to be our shadow, but again, like I've shown before, going from shadow to light, easier than going from light to shadow. It's more natural, right? You shine a light on something to illuminate it, to see its base. So we're just going with the shape. And then if I stipple with my brush, stippling, again, just like very light tapping, then I can kind of create a very subtle illusion of the tile used on this roof. And as you can see, I'm just painting and then leaving a gap where that window is. Again, I can go over the tree because I can just very quickly put its branches back in. That's no issue. That's no worry. We're not worried about that. And just like that, pretty swiftly, we have our church painted in. And yeah, it's all on the same layer. I'm just painting right... This is all on the same layer. I'm just adding the the tree brush area back in here. It's a little bit lower, so I'll just sort of paint this section right down here. Let that tree come down. And make this sort of match up again with the grass. Like I was saying before, right? I could always paint over the grass and paint over the church and see which takes precedence over which. I'm gonna make another layer just for my case because of the rail, but we actually would not normally need to do that. I'm just gonna do it for my peace of mind here. So again, I'm just looking at the silhouette of everything. I'm looking at the silhouette of this branch, or not this branch, this shrub. And I'm painting everything in a very dark color. And that's why I wanted to separate, so I'd be able to paint out the guardrail later, easier. Actually, those ones in front, I would actually be better off doing separately. Because they're already very dark, and these are going to be very light behind them. So I'm actually going to do the light ones first. Because I know it's all dark, but if I separate the two, then it'll be easier when I have to repaint them with color. Trust me, it'll be easier that way. But, you know, same philosophy, right? This is a dark silhouette color, but it's going to be painted this lighter color. So I'm just silhouette throwing in all the trees just to the edge of this plane so that they are all more or less in the shape they need to be. So now we have this cacophony of just black nothing. But we're gonna work with it. I'm going to lock this. We're pretty close to being done. We're pretty close here. We're gonna lock this, and we're gonna grab those colors again, right? Those really bright oranges. I'm gonna start pretty bright this time. Okay, I'll go back to my gold, just in case. Let's just paint this all gold, because this is all gonna be on the lighter spectrum, right? And then we're gonna grab those really deep, intense colors. We're just gonna paint that right side again. We're painting a little bit on the left, because it is still hitting the tops of these branches. But as you can see, we are kind of repeating the same methods. I'm grabbing a little bit of that red, painting over here, and just being fairly loose with the color still. There's more purple as we get further down here, so we can add more purple. More of that red. More of that yellow. I'm being fairly loose because I know a lot of it's going to be pretty covered up by this darker silhouetted tree anyway. So it doesn't really look like much, but that's okay. Do you see how, as the trees are getting closer to us, I'm paying a little bit more attention to breaking up the direction of the leaves and everything? Or I should say, like, I'm making it look more like there are branches, instead of just very, very roughly going in. As things are getting closer to us, I'm spending a little bit more time on their detail. And I'm just kind of hitting, you know, where the tops would go. Need to intersperse the branches a bit better. So kind of stagger them like a ladder. So they're not directly together, but something like that. And then I'm going to use those brighter tones on one end. The main thing is you don't want things to look even. If they look even, they no longer look organic, and then they no longer look like nature. So you want to stagger things as you go. Here, this is pretty loose. This is pretty much just really rough brush strokes. I'm going to clip these so that they don't go out of bounds. I'm just going to go right over. Do you see now why I was saying that even if we're using the darker color, it'll help to separate the layers? Because I want these to visually look like they're in the foreground and background. And then I'm just going up with these strokes. And there's all these trees that are going to be in the way, and then I'll add some variation of green so that they don't look so uniform. Because we don't want things to look uniform, right? That's what we're trying to avoid. But I want these trees to sort of stand out, so their silhouettes are more defined. You can see I'm very intentionally keeping those silhouettes more defined and easy to read because they're very close to us. And I'll grab a tiny bit of yellow, just add a little bit of a variation here. Not too much. I don't want this to be too strong. I actually probably don't want it too yellow. Probably want it more sandy. Pretty dull, honestly. Yeah, that's good. Our last step here is just the fence. And the reason why it looks so less finished is because the fence is actually a huge element. It's taken up a big piece of it. I'll grab, like, it's very deep purple. If I was spending more time on this, I would put more effort into the fence, but all I really want is the idea of it going backward in space and giving us that strong, man-made but with natural material structure, because it's giving us that leading eye to where the church is. And then we'll just lock that. Grab our lighter color. A little hard to color pick here. I'm just gonna go over the tops. And then in between, I'll just sort of like, I'll blend them together a little nicer. And then all I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna make a layer underneath that fence. And with an airbrush, I'm just going to sort of add where that shadow of it is, right? And then the airbrush doesn't actually look that good, so we're gonna fix that momentarily. I'm just sort of softening that general plane, and then we're gonna go back with our main brush. I'm gonna grab the base, and then just sort of, again, light color, so that we have our texture. And you wouldn't think that that makes a difference, but it actually does. It very much helps ground it. You see that? It very much helps ground it in space. I need a little bit more detail. There we go. So with that, that is pretty much how I would be approaching a painting study for this photo. Hopefully I was able to talk through a lot of it. So the next thing that I'm gonna do, sort of wrap things up here, is I am going to make some notes on your piece. I already mentioned the part about the planes, right? So the other thing that I would say is, looking at the way that you've done the tree, I would keep in mind how the branches are flowing, right? So right now what you have here is kind of this, you kind of have this, like, silhouette that is almost marshmallowy in a way. And then you have your shading on the bottom, which is fine. We're fine with shading on the bottom, and you are staggering it, which is nice. You are staggering the shading. You are sort of doing this, like, diagonal right-left situation, which is good. You're doing this is a fir tree. I'd sort of first establish your trunk, which you might have done here, right? And then I would look at a photo of the fir trees. Do you see how some of these were going straight up in this V shape, and then some were going outward in this V shape, and then some are going down? I would kind of do that. I would grab your base, and you're doing it a little bit here, but I would go a little stronger with it. You see how these branches go up a little bit? They have this sort of V shape. That's what we want to capture. So you want to create this, like, back and forth shape, and then using that texture of the brush, right? We're just gonna do our little V, right? Back and forth, and we should stagger this. We should stagger our tree back and forth, back and forth. That's sort of our general motion, and then we want to fill it in. So we might make something that's, like, a little bit thicker. This isn't super realistic, but again, ugly phase. This is the ugly phase. And then we're gonna go the other way. We're gonna have a few this way, and they look like they're coming at us. And then we're gonna make our brush smaller. And then we're going to sort of add those pine needles, right? That pine needle effect. And we're gonna go over them. We're gonna go over each of them a little bit. There's gonna be a little bit of an overlap, but that's okay. It actually helps that there's an overlap, because that's realistic, right? These are going to touch each other. These are gonna overlap each other. But do you see how I'm creating these pine needle effects, and then I'm adding a little bit of space? Just a little bit. I can fill it in a little bit more here, actually. Just a little bit of space. So we're just adding some rough pine needle shapes, right? Very rough. A single branched point, right? It kind of looks like a little bit like a Christmas tree. Well, because Christmas trees are fir trees, but, you know. And then you had the right idea here with the shadow. I'm gonna grab the same colors you have. And then I'll sort of explain what I would normally do with the fir tree. And I had to learn this recently, actually. I used to make my fir trees way too blue. I've had to learn this too, so no worries. I'm gonna pick up your base coat. So I'm just going to be, again, we're following the same shape. I'm following the same shape of your fir tree. And I'm just adding a little bit of a gap here so that I can let some of that shadow show through. Leaving a little bit more for shadow. I'm not being super precise, super perfect with it. I might unlock this and fill in a little bit of the inside, probably with a darker color. Yeah, you do have deeper shadow, so I'm gonna make sure that I capture that. Because it's good to have deep shadow for this. And again, I'm being very rough, and I am staggering my brush. That's the thing, like, this is very, I can tell that when you're painting this, you are, well, not this one, that wasn't mine. When you're painting this, I can tell you're a little bit unsure, because it's very, very harsh. It's very stark. It has a lot of, what's the word? It's very deliberate, and you actually don't want to be super deliberate when you're doing organic stuff. You want everything to be very loose. Now I'm gonna grab your highlight. We're just gonna add a little bit of the highlight here. Sort of to the edges as you have, but I'm more so matching the direction of the leaves. As you can see here, a little bit of highlight. So even though I wasn't as precise as you have it, do you see how my lack of precision is actually making more realistic trees? That lack of precision is actually what helps you when you're doing organic things like this. It's very weird, it's very counterintuitive, especially if you're used to, like, more man-made type stuff. It is something that is hard to learn. Or not hard to learn, but, like, hard to wrap your head around. The trees themselves are not... This is a very blue-toned green. This green has a lot of blue in it. It's actually really dull and really yellow. Do you see... Alright. If I grab this color, your main highlight color, right? And if I grab the main highlight color on this tree, and it's a little hard because, you know, there's a reason we got rid of the white. Let me see if I can grab the actual highlight. There's so much blending going on. This is the highlight color of this tree. Of this tree versus this tree. So what you actually want to do is you want your tree to be kind of really yellow. So I'm going to hue shift this. I'm going to shift the hue. You can't see the menu here, I don't think, but I'm going to, this is more towards like a blue spruce. I want to go the opposite way to more yellow. And I want to desaturate it heavily. You see the difference there? Bright green to like a very, very yellow and desaturated color. Make it lighter. Maybe a little bit more saturated. And then for the shadow, you actually want to go like, do you see this is nearly black? You want to go almost pure black for the shadow, nearly. So I would just go in, and again, I wouldn't be super precise. I would just sort of fit it in as you can. This is actually like something I had to learn because I was doing a Christmas tree for a client. And it's a lot duller than you'd think, and it's a lot more yellow. And the shadows are nearly black, which is kind of crazy. Even in this really bright atmosphere, they're almost black. So, do you see the difference, like, between this first tree, and then this tree where we sort of started, breaking down the shape with our brush, and then this tree where we made everything dull and more intense in the shadows and much more closer to yellow. This is going to be like our most realistic tree. And then I think you understand the point I was making about the mountain color, right? Is that you have more blue and more, this is actually lavender. The mountain here actually has a lot of lavender in it. This has a lot more lavender and slate gray. Not so much the trees, and then by differentiating that, you're creating nice color contrast. So, if I was to do a paint over of this, if I was to do like a really rough paint over without changing like too much of what you were doing, I've already just demonstrated what I would do with the trees. The reason that this might look a little bit awkward that I'm realizing now is because you didn't add the fence. And I think that the slope of this hill is not natural because of this road. I think a lot of it was cut and then probably like reseeded. So if you had the fence here, I think that would actually add a lot for the structure of this fence. Or for the structure of this piece, as if you were to add the fence back in. You don't have to, I'm just saying. This I would probably dull down more. I'd probably make this more like a tan. Otherwise, you are creating the Wizard of Oz yellow brick road. Which is fine if that's what you want. But I would tone that down a little bit. I would add your fence back in. You know, grab some of that color back in from the road, add it to the fence. I'm being super rough with the fence. That's such a bad fence. I might, like, take that back from what I had painted before, but you get it. You get it. It's, like, it's really guiding the eye. Again, this part of the road, I would just make a little bit softer. I would just have a little bit of a softer end to it here. Okay, if you have the rest of the hill there, you do not need the fence. The fence is sort of creating a nice break. But if you slope this hill a little bit more, then I think you can get away with not having the fence there. I think that's okay. Let's see. This does have a little bit of an intensity. If I can move it a little bit. This is about a 1-to-1 ratio you have here, like a 1-to-1 on the hill. So I would either make it like 2-to-1 here or 2-to-1 here. So I'll probably just make it 2-to-1 here. It creates a little more visual interest. I see you tried to extend the guardrail way past here. Is there a guardrail there? I guess there is. I didn't even notice it there, to be honest. It's so tiny. But yeah, you could continue that. You could continue the guardrail there. So I might just add a little bit more visual interest here. And then I'd probably do something that made the highlights really intense there, so it stood out from these. Let me see here. I would definitely change the color of the mountain. I would definitely get rid of this green hue that they have, and I would push them much closer to a lavender, ironically. I'm just gonna very roughly select these, and the reason why I would do this is so that they can really stand out from the trees. Even if it's daytime, I would make sure that you can really tell that these are different objects. Because these almost, if I blur my eyes, this almost could get mistaken for a tree. So I'm going to push these a lot further towards the sky color. See, already there, you are already creating much more of a distinction between the trees and the mountains. And I would make them a little bit lighter. Maybe make them a little bit duller. I would just add some darker shadow. And again, we still want these to show up with our variation of brush strokes. And then the highlight is also going to be a different color. It's also going to be a little bit duller. You want to establish a light source, right? So right now you have it very much like the shadow and light are even on both sides. You want to just be able to sort of pick where your sun is coming from. So if the sun is coming from this direction, right? Here. You want to just sort of heavily emphasize the shadow on one direction. Or it doesn't have to be super heavy depending on the time of day. Like if it is daytime, it's not going to be very intense, but you might want a little bit of it just to kind of guide people's eyes a little, right? You never want a highlight this intense, so I'm actually going to dull it from this very vibrant color. I'm gonna add a little bit more yellow to it as well. Adding yellow also sort of establishes where your sunlight is. And I'll grab a bit of that base so that we can kind of blend it back in a little nicer. This is what we have so far. Kind of cools everything down a little bit. I'll just do that same thing here. So you can have light on both sides, you just want to be very sparse about it. You might want to favor one side over the other, depending on your environment, depending on the situation. You can see already, even if I'm mainly following your guides, the texture brush just helps a lot. And then I really think that overall I would just sort of, I would tone down this color from being like almost neon green to just being a little bit more yellow and a little bit more desaturated. Maybe a little bit more intense. Just sort of desaturate your environment a little. Usually more neon colors can come off looking like a little bit more juvenile, a little bit more like Crayola. So you want to avoid those really, really intense greens if you can help it. If you can add some more, if you can add slightly duller colors, slightly desaturated, it gives your piece more maturity. Which, maybe you want something that's like hyperpop, maybe you want to work with neon. But when you are doing things like landscape paintings, toning things down will help a lot in creating a more serious looking professional piece. And I say this as a rainbow fox. So I know it's sometimes hard to tone this stuff down, but trust me, it does help. It does help. I'm also adding a little bit more blue onto this one because I want to gradate these nicely, right? I don't want them to all just go from one color and then the next one be solidly different. I want to sort of gradate them, and I do see that you did that. I'm just sort of emphasizing my own color changes here. Create a little bit of edge in the mountain, right? A little bit of cracks, variation on the rock formation. And sometimes I put the light where the shadow is, and it just sort of creates a little bit of a back highlight. I might do it one more here. Again, just sort of establishing the difference in the rock formation. Creates a little bit more visual interest that way, you see? Creating that variation where the light and the shadow are with mountains creates more of a natural formation to them. Maybe continue that in the back. That helps the tree stand out a little. I might soften these light areas a little bit more. Just so that they're not all like shadow, mid-ground, highlight. They have a little bit of color variation. They're not all super even that way. Create some visual interest doing that. But yeah. And then let's see. This is with the slight overpaint. And then this is before. So it's pretty subtle. But you're adding a little bit more maturity in your color palette. You're paying attention to silhouette and how things are affected. And it just creates like a nice overview. It is less intense, so if you wanted to, what you could do is you could just you could just like push the saturation of everything more at the same time. A little bit of the saturation and the background. Actually, here, I'll do that real quick just to show you. I'm gonna grab all the pieces that I used, minus the paint over. Put that all in a folder. And I'm just gonna merge it, just so we can see it all. I'm gonna select this. I'm just gonna push the brightness and contrast a tiny bit. Push the contrast, push the brightness. Maybe not that much. Very, very subtle here. Just a little bit, just so there's like more daytime. And then it's a little bit more of a fair comparison here. So a lot of what I did is I changed the angles of things, and I was desaturating some of the more intense colors, pushing where the highlights of the trees are, pushing where the sun would be. Here, I'll just very quickly, you know, the direction of the sun. So we're just sort of hitting where those highlights might be. And if it's coming from here, right, if the sun is directly overhead, if it's midday, then you can put the highlights on each side. I would just be careful that it doesn't look too uniform, that's all. So I'm sort of creating a sunlight for you. If it's direct over midday, what you could do is you could sort of add highlights very intensely here, and then they gradually disappear as you get closer to the bottom, right? That's also light direction. So you could do that as well. But yeah, this is, again, our before and after, sort of making the mountains a little bit more natural, sort of changing the hill direction. You could push that too, but again, going off of your piece. And then I hope that this helps in regards to how I would go about painting the trees, but then also how you don't have to be super precise all the time. That you can add these blotches of color and just get the feeling of where these trees are, as long as you get the right silhouette shape. Alright. We've been going for a bit, so I think that we are going to wrap it up there. I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope that you could learn some tips and tricks from this. If there is any questions that you have on this, I am happy to answer them. Feel free to reach out. I do not mind if you ask any questions. But hopefully this helps you.